Now let's discuss about the mechanism of storage of the memory. Before going to that, there are the four aspects of the memory. One is encoding, means whatever the new information that is acquired, the acquisition of the new information, that process of acquisition, that is called as process of acquisition of the information. It is called as encoding, right? The second is storage. That encoded thing, it needs to get stored. When the information is stored, either for a brief time period or for permanently or the longer duration, right? Depending on that, that is the second aspect, storage. Third is like you have encoded, you have acquired the information, you have stored it in different aspect of the brain. In the case of the explicit memory, then you need to reproduce it, right? Otherwise, what is the use of this memory? That reproduction, or at the time when it is needed, that thing is called as retrieval. Is the process of getting at and using the information, in that is held in storage, getting at and using the acquired information. Now the fourth aspect is selective attention. See, like the simplest example is, you have got the memory of certain events, right? Now you remember not each and every aspect, not the finer detail of each and every event of your life. Like say आपका कल का कोई, आप कहीं गए हो, मार्केट में गए हो कुछ शॉपिंग करने, तो आपको certain things will be, you will remember, right? So that is called as selective attention. It sorts out the more important signal from the lesser important. Only the more important part of the signal will be remembered. Like आप शॉपिंग पे गए हो, शॉपिंग मॉल में गए हो, ऐसा नहीं होगा कि आप कहाँ गए, वहाँ पे आपने इस तरह की स्टेज थी, इतने स्टेज काउंट किए, या इस तरह का गेट था, ऐसा था, सब कुछ. देयर वॉन्ट बी, यू वॉन्ट बी एबल टू रिमेंबर ईच एंड every fine details. You will be able to remember certain important aspect. So that is the selective attention, depending on the signal is important one or the lesser important one. So now this stored part, like encoding happened, right? And then storage happened. So you have stored the memory, and end product is retrieval, right? So this storage part, if it stays for longer duration, then certain aspect you will keep on forgetting. Like the sensory storage will be there. If you all of the stored information is forgetted, or you forgot all entire of the stored information, that is a short term memory. Like after certain duration, say after 5 days, you forget about events totally, or after 5 days you have forget about that event, certain aspect, but you are still able to remember few of the important aspects. So that is the part of the long term memory. So we can say the rate of forgetting is, for a certain newly acquired information, you will be able to remember the 50% or 55% after the 1 day. Like say कल आपने जो पढ़ा है, कुछ मेमोराइज किया कोई चीज़, if you haven't revised it or rehearsed it, just once you have read about this thing and you have acquired that information, after 1 day you will be able to remember near about 55%, 50 to 55%. Okay, but the same acquired information after the 7 days you will be able to remember only the 35%. Similarly, after 1 month, you will be able to remember only 15 to 20%. So you keep on forgetting certain aspect of that newly acquired information. You need to rehearse it. And what is rehearsal? In the rehearsal, you are again strengthening those memory traces, right? The again strengthening of those memory traces. Now, what is the basis of this storage of the memory? Whether it stays for few days or the weeks, that basis is the alteration in the strength of selected synaptic connections, right, that memory traces. That is the alteration in strength of the selected synaptic connection. And this strength of the synaptic connection, it happens either due to the second messenger system, via the second messenger system, like the cyclic AMP. We have discussed about the serotonin release that increases that activates the adenylyl cyclase enzyme, and which in turn increases the cyclic AMP, and increased cyclic AMP was activating in turn to the protein kinase A, right, protein kinase A. So that certain type of the second messenger system contribute to the change in the neural circuit required for learning and memory. And there might be alteration in cellular membrane channels, like in the case of NMDA AMP receptor. In the previous section we discussed, more and more AMPA receptor, they are translocated from the cytoplasmic site to the cell surface, right? Or there is alteration in synthesis of the protein and activation of gene. That was like the new AMPA receptor were getting synthesized. Structural change was happening. And it occurs, all these occurs during the change from the short-term working memory to the long-term memory. The structural changes will be needed for the newly acquired information to stay for the longer duration. And the classical example, like how we can say with so much surety that there are certain changes happening, that is called as the consolidation. Like you have encoded, you have acquired the information, now you want to store it. That process is called as consolidation. And how you can say with so much surety that consolidation happens? The perfect example is if a person suffers from a traumatic head injury, that is called as the brain concussion. Brain concussion means the brain, when, like say you are in a motor traffic accident, you are traveling in a car that is at the speed, and automatically it gets bumped to a certain stationary wall or stationary object, then your body will automatically, from the acceleration, it will come to the rest. But your brain is stored in the cranial cavity, so brain is still in the acceleration mode, so it will get and strike back to the cranial cavity, the bone of the cranium. And that injury happening to the brain because of the sudden, from the acceleration to sudden deacceleration, that is called as the concussion. So brain concussion, in these type of the events, the person is not able to remember the thing just before the accident happened. It means the events that were happening just before the accident happened, 1 or 2 minutes. कहते हैं ना कि accident होने से पहले का मुझे याद ही नहीं है 1-2 मिनट का या 5 मिनट का. Why it is that person is not able to memorize that thing? Because he acquired that information, but it didn't get consolidated. It didn't get stored in the brain, right? That is the perfect example of, that is called as retrograde amnesia. Amnesia means not able to recall back the memory. Retrograde means of certain previously, like say the event has happened, before that event certain time duration, that person is not able to remember the thing or recall back the thing. Now the implicit and explicit memory, they have got different mechanisms of action. In the case of the implicit memory, by and large we can say it was a reflexive memory, right? Like first you will acquire the information, at that time you have to be aware, but after that automatically you will be able to perform those learned skills or the habits, right? So most form of implicit memory, they are acquired through different form of reflexive pathway, the habituation and sensitization. Like in the case of the habituation, what was happening? The person was getting habituated due to repeated stimulus, because there was decrease with the progressive stimulus. The next stimulus, like at the time of the first stimulus, there was influx of the calcium ion which was releasing neurotransmitter. At the 100th time of that same stimulus, the concentration of the calcium is getting decreased. So that synaptic transmission gets habituated to that stimulus. That is the reflexive pathway for the habituation. And sensitization, it was getting more and more sensitized. Like we took the example of that presynaptic facilitation. So this habituation and sensitization, this learning happens via the reflexive, strengthening or weakening the synaptic transmission through those pathways. And the associative learning, the conditioning, the this one operant conditioning and the classical conditioning. It was also associated with the reflexive pathway, means in the classical or the operant conditioning, the person was performing a particular certain events. Like in the case of the classical conditioning, salivation was happening, right? The salivation part that is controlled, that is the emotional aspect, right? Automatic. And why it was the salivation happened to a previously non-significant stimulus like ring of the bell, because that auditory pathway has got new formed synaptic connection with the salivation process, right? Similarly, in the operant conditioning, that reward of the punishment pathway was strengthening. So short term storage of this implicit memory, it happens because of the change in the effectiveness of the synaptic transmission. And what were those changes in the synaptic transmission? Either the post-tetanic potentiation, or the long-term potentiation, or the sensitization, or the long-term depression. So all these four events, I won't go into detail because we have discussed in the previous section. So if anybody asks you about the mechanism of implicit memory, these post-tetanic potentiation, long-term potentiation, sensitization, and long-term depression are the mechanism. You are supposed to write in detail about these. In the previous section we have covered. Okay. Now, that was for the short-term storage of the implicit memory, short-term storage. Now, the long-term storage of the implicit memory, the process by which the short-term memory is converted into a stable long-term, that is called as consolidation, means that memory has got consolidated. And this consolidation happens, the long-term storage happens via the structural changes. Just remember these three things: the chemical changes, the physical changes, or the structural changes. Chemical changes is for the short-term memory, physical is intermediate, and structural changes is for the long term. So what are these structural changes? Either the change in the gene expression, and that increased or decreased gene expression will help in synthesizing the new protein. Either the new protein will get synthesized, or the protein synthesis was happening but it will get enhanced, right? Or there will be the growth or pruning of the synaptic connections. Like say this is presynaptic neuron, it has got 4-5 branches, dendrites, and it has got the connection with the postsynaptic neuron. Either previously there were 2 connections, now it will be via the 3 or 4 connections. All those 4 presynaptic, that ending will form the connection with the postsynaptic neuron, or there will be the strengthening, or there will be decrease in these. Say before, prior to that, there was like say the 3 connection, but now it has become with the 2 only, like the subliminal fringe or the occlusion kind of the thing, right? That will happen in the long term storage of the implicit memory. Okay.